At some point in the growth of a business, you can keep winning new customers organically, but to grow, especially a services business quickly, acquisition becomes really a viable alternative. It was only 5 years ago, I hadn't done any of it. We've done 7 in the last 4 years, and I'd like to think we have a good system for doing them now.
Business Focus.
Welcome to Business Focus for another week. This is, of course, the podcast that helps people in business get ahead with new ideas and new tech. And this week, as I'm armed with my Flying Power energy drink from Aldi, don't know why that's important, I am going to be talking with Ross Sardi, the CEO of First Focus, about all things mergers and acquisitions. The aim is to leverage his experience after, I believe, 7 acquisitions? Seven acquisitions, to really help you if you're in the process or thinking about being involved in the sale of or purchase of a business, how to make that a extremely profitable process for you or a very profitable outcome. So with my words not working so well in that intro, I will go straight into asking Ross to give us some detail about the experience you've had, why people should look at you as something of an expert. No pressure. So over to you. Let's talk about when you first got involved in the M&A space and where you're at now.
Yeah, it's amazing in some ways. I am being seen as an expert in this because it was only 5 years ago, I hadn't done any of it. But sitting here now, we've done 7 in the last 4 years, and I'd like to think we have a good system for doing them now. So,
which we're going to dive into and pick apart and try and use as something of a template for other people to adapt or adopt, I should say.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's start with let's just go into, to set the scene, the different types of forms an acquisition or a merger can take. So, I've got a bunch here like the share sale, client asset sale, merger, blah, blah. Let's start with the ones that you've been involved in. What different forms have they taken?
I'm going to be controversial out of the gate and say that mergers don't actually exist. So I prefer to think of it more as A than M&A. I think there's always
a junior partner.
There's always an acquirer. Mergers of equals are rare. Yeah. And they often get pitched as mergers to make someone feel a little better in the process. But look, certainly the ones we've done, they are acquisitions. And there's at some point in the growth of a business, you can keep winning new customers organically through sales and marketing, through networks, through referrals and agents. There's lots of different ways to do sales and marketing. But to grow, especially a services business quickly, acquisition becomes really a viable alternative, and hence why we started going down that path.
So I saw something you wrote in a presentation. You were saying essentially in each case, what you're really buying is maintainable future earnings. That's
right. I mean, especially my context is obviously coming from a services business. We're not Google buying the latest IP that some startup has done. So what we're essentially buying is clients and staff, which together are creating an income stream. Mm-hmm. And so coming back to I think you're asking about asset purchase or a share sale. No matter which of those it is, and there's good and bad things about both, which we can cover. So that it really, you have to be buying a profitable business, or at least one that you think you can turn
around.
Because otherwise, why are you doing it? There's a couple of very rare reasons why you might want to do it, but ultimately you're buying profit.
So how does that frame whether or not it's an asset sale or a share sale?
Share sale?
Yeah.
There's lots of pros and cons to each, and we've done some of each as well. It's not like we always even preference one over the other, because in a share sale, you have the advantage of a lot less work up front in some ways, because you're buying the business as a going concern. It can continue to operate post-sale in its own, completely in its own right, which means integration is more on your timeline then, right? You can keep it going, you can start integrating it. Whereas an asset purchase, you're really just buying bits out of an existing entity, right? So you've got to, re-sign contracts or novate them with clients and staff and suppliers. So there's a lot more work prior. but then a lot less work that has to happen after it. So you're kind of front loading all the work, but then it's yours. It's integrated. At least somewhat integrated on day one. The big reason people avoid share sale agreements is what they perceive as being the risk in buying existing liabilities of a business, right?
Okay.
That's kind of why historically people have preferred asset purchases. But there are ways to mitigate those through warranties in a share sale agreement and stuff like that. So generally, share sale agreement is a smoother way for the clients and for the staff. And again, if that's what you're buying, there's obviously a really big incentive to make it easy for the clients and the staff, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why we've tended to preference share sale agreements unless it's been a very small purchase.
Surely too, if the other company, if it's going to be a client purchase and the entity you're buying those from will continue to operate in some form, it would be very hard to ring fence those clients in a lot of cases, wouldn't it?
Well, despite the business, maybe if you're buying the clients and staff out of another business, that business that's left behind, there's nothing left in it normally, right? So yes, the entity might exist, but the owners are generally going to shut that down, or that it ceases to exist.
So it really is just about the liabilities.
Liability is a big one. If we flip this around and go, what about the seller? What do I prefer as the seller? It often comes down to tax effectiveness. And so sellers will have a preference to one or the other based on how they need to get the money actually back into their pocket, because generally a company might be owned by a trust and there might be various distributions. So I'll leave that to the accountants to decide. And they said there are reasons for both, but generally a share sale is better from a tax perspective because you can treat that as a capital gain. And it's coming straight to the owner of the business as opposed to an asset purchase where the money is still in the company. So that's generally one or the other. There's some other things like there's rules around if you hit 55 and you sell a business, so share sale, you're allowed to essentially take that capital gains free. It's almost like retirement income. So there's a heap of rules, right?
Okay.
So we'll leave. That's a separate podcast.
Yeah, I think that's accounting implications of a sale are different. What we'll do is we'll try and give this some structure. So let's break. Let's come with the next two sections. Let's do if you're preparing to sell, what should you consider, and then we'll do preparing to buy, what should you consider. And obviously, we're not talking about a specific segment, so we can only talk in high level concepts, really. Yeah. But if we're talking about someone who's looking to sell or someone who's going to be involved in the sale of a business, how important is it to identify the ideal buyer of that business?
Yeah, it's really important because it helps you sort of plan for how you're preparing it, right? And because different buyers will be looking for different things out of the business. But it has to start with, as the owner of a business, or maybe there's a couple of owners, being really clear on what the ideal scenario is, not just a scenario or a bunch of potential ones. Like, what's your actual perfect scenario? Who's the buyer? What's the price? What's the structure? Because that allows you to then build all the material around how you're going to go to market with that. It could be the financial information you provide, and the short list of buyers that you're going to look at. But in terms of preparing for sale and preparing for buying is actually not that different, because in both cases you need to have a really well-run business. Because if you're selling, well, the buyer is going to want the business to operate, and specifically to operate without you as much as possible. Because as an owner, you're probably exiting, not always, but you're generally going to be exiting. And so business running well, ideally without you. But you think about buying, it's not that different. Like, you're suddenly, it's pretty impactful to your business when you acquire another one, and you're going to be taking your eye off a bunch of stuff. So the business has to be running well without you, right? Like, there's a definitely,
makes sense.
It's not that different. And there's the saying which you should be running a business like you're always prepared to sell it is actually because that means it's a well-run business.
Having said that, if you're looking to sell a business, you may make different financial decisions or purchasing decisions or even taxation or accounting decisions based off whether you're trying to build EBITDA or as Americans friends say, EBITDA. I still can't get my head around that, but that's okay. Or whatever you're trying to do, like that may drive it. So maybe, I guess touching on that, absolutely yes, you need to have a business that can operate essentially without you there, but how would it potentially impact, your investment, say in the 12 to 24 months leading up to sale, or how you make some of those decisions?
Look, most people that I talk to about wanting to sell their business say they're about 2 years away from selling, right? Because they want to spend the next 2 years doing all these things to prepare it for sale. Guess what they're saying 2 years from now?
Another 2 years.
Yeah, because it's actually not that hard to it's actually really hard to suddenly change the way you're running the business, to strip a heap of costs out, or to suddenly make it twice as profitable. And if you're a sophisticated buyer, you can see through that anyway. If expenses are this and then they're suddenly half, well,
yeah, okay, you might just not be paying some bills.
Right. So yes, there are going to be. You're not going to make there are big investments. You're not going to start investing in something that has a 3-year payoff or something like that. Or maybe if you can show after 12 months that your investment is going to pay off, again, that's worth something, right? So you can't drastically change the business. That's probably the key takeaway I would say, right? And the higher quality and the more consistent your business is, that has value in itself. Businesses are generally valued on a multiple of profit. Let's not be around that. So yes, it's obviously important to run a profitable business in the lead up. But as I said, a buyer's going to be looking at multiple years of track record generally and have good reasons for any major variances.
Yeah, going back to our point before, maintainable future earnings, not one-off earnings that may or may not lead to a future replication of that.
Yeah, and you don't exactly know what the buyer's going to do with it afterwards either, right? So it's not, for us, we're fully integrating the businesses every time. Which means, some of the costs that exist, and we're kind of going to be changing to our cost base anyway. And so the buyer's going to have to look at a more detailed version of the business than just, hey, here's some profit and here's some revenue, right? So that's
how much of your perceived value of your business, if you're looking to sell, can be based off what you know of the potential buyer's ability to gain synergies post-sale?
That point is a good argument back and forth in the discussion, right? Because as a buyer, you're like, well, I'm going to buy your business based on what you're doing today, and as a seller, I was like, yeah, but you're going to get this advantage after right? So it is a good negotiation point for that, for for on both sides. If you know the buyer's going to can close down the office and save on the rent. Well, yeah, you're going to be wanting to try and use that as a negotiating point, right?
Yeah.
But as the buyer, you're like, well, that's my advantage, right?
I'm doing the hard work to make that happen. That doesn't happen unless this happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So everything's up for negotiation, right? But it's all getting to a fair price, which is why I said, rather than coming up, sort of working to get to a price like that, I think the best sellers that I've seen are ones that actually can articulate the price they're after and why, not kind of make it a bidding process. And a lot of bigger brokerage firms and that kind of stuff will try to go out to market and essentially get the market to dictate a price. That's what we're not putting a price on this. We'll let the market decide. But I know personally as a buyer, I'd like to see someone that has an idea of what they actually want from their business, because it's the same as buying a house, right? You don't go and say, well, how much is this? Oh, it's going for auction. I'm not going to tell you what the range is. It's like, well, you generally still going to start with some sort of indication.
That's what reserve prices are, right? Like you've got to have some sort of minimum expectation.
Yeah.
So what is, I guess, your willingness to adjust as a potential buyer, putting yourself in that seat?
Yeah.
Someone looking to sell their business has a price. How much is their willingness to stay in and work through an earnout, impact your willingness to maybe put a higher top end on that? Conditional top end, I would say.
It's all about the person, right? And that's the hard part, is that putting a transaction is very much around numbers. but it's also around people. And so what might look like it makes sense on a piece of paper, hey, yes, we want to earn out, we want them to stay. Maybe you don't want to work with the person. Maybe they're not going to fit in with your company culture. Maybe that you can sense that they're going to have a hard time letting go of stuff. They're going to, because that's one of the biggest challenges with an earnout is how can I be held to an earnout when I no longer have control of the business, right? That's probably, if you point to a discussion that happens in every single scenario, that's the one around earnouts, right? But it's an earnout, but what's my level of influence?
Yeah.
On
What
that?
levers can I pull to make sure I don't miss out on this?
Yeah. My is that the earnout needs to be structured so that everything is win-win. And if the seller has any even inclination or thought that the buyer's going to try and do me out of my earnout, well, that means that earnout's not structured well, because that's losing for them as well, right? They have to be structured as win-win so that everyone's incentivized to do the same thing.
Are there any sort of high-level sort of universal truths when it comes to earnouts that enable like a good structure, or some things that should be included to make sure that they're win-win?
Clear and simple metrics, because you don't want to spend the time. I mean, just like a commission sales model, right? You don't want to spend the time arguing about the numbers. Let's spend the time making doing the sale, right? So let's spend the time actually making sure we hit the numbers, not arguing about them. So clear, simple. Generally, if we are doing an earnout, it'll be fairly broad brush, kind of on target. So if it's anywhere within X% of acceptable, let's just call it on target. You know what I mean? So let's actually only worry about talking about this if it's kind of well below or well above, and you can have an upside or a downside. So, broadly what we're trying to say is it's not actually really an earnout, it's a delayed payment for a successful transaction. You know what I mean? It's kind of, and broadly it's in this space of your customers generally stay and your staff generally stay.
And that was actually going to be my next question is sometimes do those earnout terms go past a financial figure, but more like we've successfully exited 2 leases, we've retained 90% of our staff, like those kind of numbers?
Staff, yes. Staff retention, definitely. There might be other clauses in there, but they're generally not tied to an earnout. If it's things like leases or whatever, it's generally more a condition precedent or something that's you can actually lock in from day one. I'm sure there is going to be cases where there's some unusual project or scenario, something that you can put something around. But most of the ones I've seen are around staff retention, client retention, and sales and profitability. And sometimes I actually tend to avoid profitability-based earnouts because it's hard. You can't integrate the company as well in that, because it's hard to measure profitability once it's integrated. And so we tend to stick to, like a recurring revenue or gross profit or something that, because again, you don't want to argue about the measure. Yeah.
And customer churn too might be a more easy to track sort of option, or?
Yeah, it varies because it depends in a recurring revenue, or maybe you're not a recurring revenue business, so customers only transact, at infrequently. And so it's, you give me as creative as you want.
Yeah.
As long as it's clear and understood, and you're not going to be arguing about it again in 12 months' time or 36 months or 6 months, however long that period is.
I love it how you said the trick is to keep it simple, and I just go like, what if you made it more complex with this idea? What about this idea? How about that one? Anyway, you did well not to just tell me to shut up. Okay, let's talk about if you're preparing to buy, and something you've spoken to me about in the past is approaching versus being approached. So if you're wanting to purchase, you personally don't like to go to a potential company that you could buy, because why?
I take it, we go back to the house metaphor, right? And that is, if you want to buy a house, I want to ask you, how would you start looking for a house to buy?
I would see it online, I would say. I wouldn't go knock on a door. So yeah, that makes sense. You win.
It's exactly the same. Okay. So, we're talking about multi-million-dollar asset. It's the only probably other one that most of us buy in our lives is a house. And some people buy a business, right? So you can go and start approaching people, but same as the house. How would you be able to convince someone in that street that you really want to live in to sell their house? Well, you're probably going to pay a lot more.
You would, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There isn't a problem they need to solve in that moment. You're trying to convince them that it's in their best interest. You'll pay a premium. Got it.
So that's that at a high level. That's kind of the why I go down that path. And so, that's where people then start doing things like come up with more creative earnouts where they might be take some money out of the business and keep some in. So because you're trying to incentivize someone who otherwise wasn't going to sell their business to come and sell their business to you and work for you instead. Well, there has to be an upside for them in that. So it's a different sort of deal rather than going down one that, hey, I'm ready to exit my business or at least thinking about it. And so cool, let's actually start talking about what that looks like.
How important is that story around why someone wants to exit their business?
Critical.
Yeah, because if it's because it's a dumpster fire, no, thank you.
Yeah,
because all my staff hate me. Okay.
Because I've got a big, I got a big customer that's about to leave.
Yeah.
So you have to start with why, and so back to the selling, you have to know your why, and that, like I said, includes then understanding the buyer that you want, and because certainly in managed services, most business owners are looking to sell. They care about where their staff are going to go and where their clients are going to go because they genuinely care, right? They're connected to their customers, and I'm sure that's the same in most industries. So, you have to have a good why for sure.
The next question then is what you touched on before was that you have to have a business as a buyer that can run essentially without you there, or you're really not involved perhaps in the process of that integration, right? So maybe painting a best practice picture for people who might be looking to buy out there. How have you gone about it with setting up your integration team?
For the first couple, not at all. I mean, and it's hard to go and do your first acquisition and have the perfect process and the perfect team. You are going to make mistakes no matter how well planned you are. And so the most important thing is kind of being, in terms of integration team, is being prepared for what you don't know and having the capacity and the ability to adjust, right? Because you're going to make mistakes. So integrating a business is no different to any other project that needs a detailed plan. And it's got a lot of complex stakeholders and there's a lot of moving parts, right? So it's a really good project manager is needed. And certainly I've been able to have that, by my side, I guess, through the last quite a few now.
But it was you first up, you for one and two maybe?
Yeah, probably not as well. I mean, yes, to a point. And then because you're generally running multiple streams, you've got a people integration, you've got the clients, you've got technical systems, you've got business systems. So you're running a bunch of streams really. But I certainly realized soon enough that I'm not as good a project manager as I am the other parts of the acquisition process, which is the contractual part and the relationship part and the financial analysis and all that sort of stuff. So, a strong project manager to make sure that all the little loose ends are thought about and tracked and managed and communicate is going to get you through most of it.
How much did the checklist maybe you thought you were working with acquisition 1 and 2 change and grow to what now is the checklist with number 7 and more coming?
Yeah, and you or I were just talking earlier today about adding something else to that checklist that came up in our meeting earlier. Because out of every one, there's some other little thing that you go, oh, better add that to the list for next time. It keeps growing, and probably the lens that we're bringing more and more to it is the customer and staff experience, right? Like if that's if my goal is not to integrate, my goal is to have staff and customers have the best possible experience, what do I have to do? And so sometimes that means going slower at some things. Sometimes it means going faster. And so probably if I think about the first two that we did, the first one we did really fast, second one we did really slow, and that was just as bad, if not worse, because the death by 1,000 cuts it felt like it was never finished and it was just always change. So, we've found a pretty good balance now in a fairly fast integration, but only because the team is resourced to be able to do it.
Yeah, I was a part of, I was here for the last two actually when I think about it. And I was surprised at how fast that was done. But my question, I suppose, is when you look at a purchase price, how much of an intangible cost do you mentally kind of add to that when it comes to just some of those unexpected problems or the integration piece that you didn't realize was going to be as hard as it is, or whatever it might be? And does that decrease over time as you do get better at these things? I'm sure it does. I
probably don't personally, I don't think about it like that. I am putting in a weighted risk component to kind of the ongoing, certain parts of the ongoing revenue stream, I guess. But I'm also maybe overly optimistic at the ability to, cross-sell and get extra value out of the acquisition. So my assumption is always that we're going to, any risks that come out of this, any sort of downside, is going to be more than outweighed by the upside. Because if there's no, back to the 1 + 1 can't equal just 2. There's not much point doing it then. There has to be enough upside so that you can, outweigh the risks or any unexpected costs. So your earnout also takes a part of that, right? Because you want, if there is a big risk, let's say there's a very large customer concentration, very common. A lot of businesses, especially smaller businesses, are built off the back of a handful of customers, right? And so whether it's IT or any other industry, well, that's probably one of the biggest risks, because now you've got a relationship with probably the owner had with some key customers. But that's where you're handling it more in the earnout, so that you're sharing that risk with the outgoing owners.
Yeah. That single source of truth, I think I've heard it called, is it must be one of the harder things to manage, and must be one of the key reasons to have an earnout, to keep that person in who is seen as a trusted advisor, a friend, often, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. Because a lot of small businesses start from, as you said, a relationship with someone. Not many people start a business just sitting there going, I'm going to start a business today with no customers, no contacts. Like, again, it's often built on the back of relationships. And I say with First Focus as well, we've got some very, very old customers, right? Like, most businesses have some customers who have been there from the beginning, right?
Yep. So I think when we talk about just the integration team creating capacity, I've got some notes here that and these are I've totally plagiarized these off a presentation you've done in the past, but create capacity to spend a lot of time with staff, clients, to integrate IT, integrate PSA, RM, that's specific to MSP space, moving office, re-sign clients, and standardize tech stack, cross-sell, upsell, expand new geography or services as required. Anything you want to touch there in particular when it comes to making sure you create capacity and time to do that?
Clients and staff, again, I mean, I feel like, that's kind of the answer to every one of your questions today. But, you have to take the time to get to know the staff and clients, and kind of come with a sensitivity that they didn't actually choose to work for you, right? Like, they just came to work one day and were told that you're now working for that person instead of that person.
Which creates uncertainty and fear and doubt, and
Yeah, and the customer's the same, right? They probably went through some long process to procure something from you, and then all of a sudden, actually, you're now talking to a different company, right? And so I think there's a level of almost respect you have to come to the process with in that scenario, and know that you need to earn that trust again. You're starting from zero again, or even maybe starting from a negative position because they've all heard of the bad story, right? Like, we all know someone that's got acquired, and then the service went down or got acquired, and the person got made redundant. Everyone's heard of the bad story, and so you're probably even starting from a negative position sometimes.
Definitely prove them wrong, basically.
Yeah.
So what are the key? I mean, you touched on it a little bit there, but what are the key initiatives that you would recommend that any potential buyer does post-sale to make sure they keep the staff happy? Obviously, being fast to communicate effectively, but past that, I guess sticking to your word and making sure the things you've said will happen do happen.
Sticking to it, like, transparency is key, because you can't go in and say everyone's going to keep their jobs, and then 2 weeks later say actually someone's not. So the transparency of the process of what is going to change and what's not, as I said, just back to the kind of time with people builds relationships. And so, celebrate the fact that the businesses are coming together. There's obviously going to be lots of different scenarios about what the owner is staying for a little while.
Yeah.
So there's obviously going to be some differences there. But celebrate it. It's exciting. I mean, yes, there's risk and it's uncertain and there's negative perceptions and that kind of stuff. But on the plus side, these kind of things only happen to most people, a couple of times in their life, career. I mean, if you're the seller, businesses do most people sell in their life. If you're working somewhere, how many times do you go through that process? So I think there's also a lot of excitement, and you can generate and turn it into something exciting as well.
I think so. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be something scary,
grim and sad.
Yeah,
I think, but people, change is often seen as scary. But I think touching on a point you made before, which is that mergers don't really happen. There's always a senior or a junior or whatever. Putting it on a first focus lens, always the bigger entity in the equation, right? But coming into a bigger entity can present opportunities for professional growth, development, more room to go up into. So I think it's probably going to come down a lot to how you paint that picture. Like, why is this a good thing? That's part of it, right? Yeah. Anyway, communication, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But look at me go. Still not involved in the integration team. That's fine. David can keep doing that. All right. So I want to move on to the next part, which is enterprise value. Again, variables in how this is determined and what will drive it. But if we can sort of give some high level ideas to people who are looking to sell, or if people are looking to buy, how they can say that these things don't exist in sufficient quality and therefore drive the value down. Let's talk about technology first. How does technology or the use of it drive enterprise value?
I'll come to it with it initially from a managed service provider lens, and that is that we're in the business of technology, and so you'd expect the technology to be of a certain level. Probably what's not as important is alignment of technologies, because you generally, if you're going to be doing a full integration, you're going to be ripping out what they've got anyway and plugging it into yours. However, what you are looking for a lot of the time is a good use of technology in not having as high a reliance on labor, right? So any time an organization has used automation or has invested in technology to improve customer experience, that's of huge value. One, because they've been able to reduce their costs or because of it, but also those are the things that you can potentially learn from to bring into your business. And so again, if you go a bit more outside our sector, other businesses are acquiring other organizations because of technology that they've got or built or used, right? I said ours is a bit different because we all pretty good at using technology.
Yeah.
Pretty good. I mean, there's variances, but certainly in other sectors, an organization that's done some cool stuff with software and technology and stuff, it adds a lot of value to the business, because it's now, hey, I can buy something, I don't have to build it myself.
And conversely, if there's a truckload of tech debt or inefficient processes, manual handling, double entry.
That's probably one of the big, because I think you touched on before, what do I not spend on for the last couple of years before sale? That's probably one of the biggest things that gets neglected is investment in technology, because most things you can not invest in for 2 years and that's okay. But if you're not investing in technology for 2 years, you're behind.
Yeah, especially when you think about the refresh life cycle on a lot of technology, right?
Yeah.
Like it's getting pretty old at that. Even if it was new 3 years ago, 2 years on, you're like, okay.
Yeah, so tech debt, and then leading that into, it's an extension of technology. If we talk about cybersecurity, there's been multiple large breaches over, not too distant past, where an organization has been acquired. Day one, if an incident occurs there, that's now your fault, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely that kind of cybersecurity due diligence is becoming more important.
That's huge. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, the immediate risk of taking on something
like
that
day one, day two.
You have no ability at that point really to impact the level of resilience in that business.
That's right. So because you are buying, especially if you're buying in a share sale, you're just buying what exists, and so there is a level of due diligence that has to take place for that, and some warranties and stuff around that from the seller. But if you're a seller and you haven't invested in cybersecurity, that's becoming a bigger thing that a buyer can point to.
I suppose a similar point is if you've got processes that revolve around a single person, not necessarily even just single piece of tech.
Yeah,
that's also potentially going to drop the value, right? Because if that person and all the things in their head goes,
because you're straight away introducing a higher risk of turnover in an acquisition, and if there's a key person that has some stuff, and that's why those key people often end up as part of an earnout, retention of those key people, and you can incentivize in different ways. I've seen all sorts of again creative things to incentivize the person to stay. My only I guess piece of advice there is not make sure you are incentivizing the right thing, not just bumping it down the road to the end of the earnout, and it's just you're just delaying an inevitable sort of.
So there's a plan in place to make sure that resiliency is put in place, that you get away from that.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So having touched on the single points of failure in terms of both processes and people, probably the next thing I want to touch on is financial. So what? Again, I'm sure it will vary from sector to sector, but in your view, to drive enterprise value, what are the most important financial factors to consider or numbers to drive?
Yeah, so again, I'll start by focusing on our industry, which is that it's a pretty accepted formula, or not formula maybe, but a pretty accepted standard that valuations are linked to a multiple of EBITDA. Now, the thing is, though, that the multiple changes usually depending on the size of the business. So, the multiple at, if you're only doing under 500,000 of profit a year versus 5 million of profit a year, that 5 million of profit is not 10 times as valuable. There's a multiplier effect that happens, right? So the multiplier increases as the business increases. So you want a profitable business, but it also matters to have a big business because there aren't as many of them, and so they're more valuable, right? So there are, though, alternative measures that are around like revenue-based valuations. And so SaaS companies, can often use this because they are more looking for the value of the recurring revenue and the profit. The profit kind of falls off the back of that, yes, but we're not actually basing the business on the value of the profit. We're basing it on the amount of customers that are locked in and continuing to buy from you. And so obviously you've seen that over the years with SaaS businesses even running at a loss during that sort of ramp-up phase, and they're really not being valued on their profit at all. They're being valued on the quality of their tech, but also the amount of recurring revenue that they have. And so most of those rapid growth sort of software companies, the thing they're targeting more than anything to get to that next funding round is more recurring revenue. And so it's no different for us. We can look at recurring revenue, non-recurring revenue like projects and hardware sales and stuff like that. So we can do a revenue-based valuation, but ultimately profit-based valuation is generally the norm, and it's a multiple of your profit essentially.
So that's what's going to drive the multiple from, I guess, a market valuation perspective. But from an appetite to buy perspective, I assume that if it's significantly higher than the cost of doing it organically, or the time it would take to do it organically isn't, oppressively long, that's when it just stops being of interest, right? Like it has to make sense against alternative options.
It does, and it depends on your overall intent. We touched right at the beginning about intent for selling. We didn't really talk about that much on intent for buying, right? And so
let's do that now. We own this. This is our spot. Let's do what we want.
So we talked about, sellers, you have to have a why. Well, buyers have to have a why as well. It's not just to be bigger. And so you have a portion of buyers that are doing it in order to roll up quickly to then sell themselves. Like we said, a bigger business has a higher multiple, so you get what they call multiple appreciation. So if you get two companies together that are both 5 times multiple, but put them together, they might be at 6 times multiple. So you haven't actually had to add a single bit of profit to that combined business, and it's now worth more. That's essentially how private equity makes a lot of their money, right? But for them, they're doing it on a very, very tight time frame. And so you're more willing to do it on a higher multiple because you've got a deadline and you need to do it quickly. Most people are not in a rush as much as a PE might be. But your reason for buying, like if you're buying at 5 times multiple, that means it's going to take 5 years for you to earn that profit back. That's actually, I mean, that's a long time, right?
It's a lengthy runway.
Yeah. So, what is it else that you're trying to do with that business to buy it over that time? If you're just buying it just to wait the 5 years for it to pay itself off, customers are going to go during that time, and you're going to have a lot of risk in that. Or are you buying it to get into a new geography, add a new line of service, do something that means you can sell something new that you didn't sell yesterday? Because then otherwise, if you're just buying the business solely for the benefit of that business and what it's doing today, a higher multiple becomes risky. Because if you're 6, 7, 8 times multiple, you're not getting your profit back for years, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to use multiple appreciation as a term at some point in a chat with someone and feel smart, but that's fine. Part of that, though, right, is your ability potentially with a complementary customer base or complementary product sets to cross-sell, upsell, however you want to describe it. Yeah. So how receptive have you found acquired clients to be to go through that process and really openly welcome that approach? Yeah,
I talked through our experience because it's actually quite interesting is you have, I guess, they're smaller clients that aren't necessarily as receptive to that and maybe even are worried about the transition to a larger company. But then you have their larger clients that are actually, oh, thank God, I've been waiting for,
right.
for this,
okay.
We were worried we were outgrowing the maturity of the smaller provider and that we need all these other services. So there's probably almost like a two-pace thing that occurs there. When you're buying, you need some sort of overlap. It's either their services are the same, but they can sell them to a new set of customers, maybe larger customers that I am having now or in a new place where I'm having now. Or they target the same customer profile, but they can bring a new service to that. There has to be some sort of overlap. Otherwise, you can't, two businesses, they're too different and no point bringing them together.
Well, how much do you recommend interviewing clients as part of a sale process?
I'd love to.
but
the sellers don't normally want to allow that. And I can understand why.
Sure, there's a risk element.
Yeah. So, so we've rarely done it, not through a lack of wanting to, and it's sort of dropped off our radar now, just because we know it's kind of
you're just going to get battered away. Won't bother. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I certainly know of some in some sectors that's more of a normal thing, and you can imagine if there's a very couple of key customers that becomes maybe a final step of due. Once you've ticked off everything else, that becomes a final step to actually to proceed or something like that.
We actually probably haven't touched enough on the whole due diligence piece really, and we probably don't have time to go into it in great depth now because I have left it too long. So
part 2 next season.
Part 2 next season. Okay, boom. All right. In passing though, due diligence. Any quick fire lesson you've learned in your time that day one you wish you'd done compared to time 7?
You can get external due diligence involved, and generally, if you're using a bank or something like that, they might want you to do that. That can be good for the sort of financial and compliance side of it, but the thing I would say for people to focus on is, I guess, what's called operational due diligence and people due diligence, because what you're trying to work out is, are these businesses actually going to work well together? It's great that it works in a spreadsheet, but it's how am I actually going to work out what the people are like? And so, for me, a key part of due diligence is I want to meet with key managers because if the whole process I'm only talking to the owner, at some level that person is going. I need those managers to be involved in part of the process early on. One, to see what they're like, but to get their buy-in really, really early. And so the people due diligence is I said, as much as you can do in that, getting access to any sort of employee survey data and things like that. Or if they don't have one, maybe even getting one done.
Okay. Good heads up. All right. What else do we need to talk about before we head off? Actually, no, that was a question I had. So if you're packaging up your business, potentially with a broker, someone doing that for you, what should you make sure your broker doesn't do or that you don't tell your broker to do when you package that up and present it to the market?
Brokers think they're doing a really good thing by dressing it up and making it look really good. Sometimes they're just creating unrealistic expectations. The good ones that I've seen actually understand the market. There's quite a few brokers will do any sort of business. I think one that actually understands the market that you're in is really important, because they'll be able to hit the right kind of points, I guess, that a prospective buyer is after, and knowing when to get out of the way. So, I think that there are some brokers that think that part of what they're trying to do is be the middle person between the buyer and the seller, whereas it's actually, that's good initially, but then what you actually want to do is
Get out of the way.
And so I think from a seller's perspective, getting the exact style of engagement, the exact what the scope of the engagement looks like early on, to say, your job is to find me a short list of buyers, or your job is to, find me a short list of buyers and put all my financial reporting together. Like, you're just being very clear on the scope of that service, because they can actually start doing a disservice at some point by sort of preventing a relationship, or think they're doing good by trying to get a hard deal, but all they're doing is being a blocker to the deal.
I imagine too, if they're not really giving access to the end user, you may almost start going, "What's wrong with the end user? Why are they not giving me access? Like, what are they shielding me from?"
Yeah,
maybe, I don't know. Unless I'm just a guy who just thinks everyone's out to get me. I don't know. That's fine. Probably a good place to leave it. Brendan just needs to go have a good look at himself. All right, let's leave it there. But I think hopefully we've added a lot of value to anyone out there who is looking to potentially buy or sell, or to be involved in that process, and wanting to know, I guess, the pitfalls, the way, the way to maximize the value you can add in that process. If anyone has got any questions, Ross is on LinkedIn. You'll find him there, Ross Sardi. And of course, I should also give a plug. If there is an MSP out there, if you're working for one and you want to talk to Ross about the option of selling or how to maybe go about that, I'm sure he would also be very, very happy to talk to you. I had to put that plug in, part of the condition of him coming on. Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Of course, as always, please do the whole like and subscribe thing, smash that button, etc., etc. It does help us get the podcast in front of more people. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks again for watching.